And welcome back to another episode of Civil Discord, your weekly dose of radical curiosity. I am the one who is here almost every single episode. Not here not here as much as my co-host, but here almost every episode. The notorious BLG, aka Maurice, out here in the People's Republic of Texas, and with me again here more often than I am is the great supreme overlord of liberty is Amanda out there in the People's Republic of California. Amanda, how's it going?
It's going great, Maurice. I'm excited because we're gonna solve a global crisis here on this podcast today. So I'm excited for it.
We are. And for those who have been under rocks, and I will admit I am under a rock most of the time. And when I say most of the time, like my wife and I were having this conversation Thursday, and I said, I really like for a while now, I've taken a break from politics, from all of the diving in things. The only time that I may really like discuss and go into politics is for the podcast. Like that is it. I haven't cut out all of my political talks as far as podcasts and things are concerned, but as far as like diving deep and doing all the research and stuff, the only time I do that is for this podcast. And so she's like, really? I was like, yes. It's like, and it's been mind freeing for me, mainly because of all the stress that is happening elsewhere in my life. I'm like, politics for right now will need to take a backseat. So it is what it is. But for if you don't know and you've been like me, you've kind of been living under a rock. There is World War III is getting ready to start. Like I mean, I don't know. That's what everybody's saying. That's what I'm seeing on the TikToks and the Instagrams is World War III. But we are going to talk about this whole Ukraine and Russia conflict and war and everything that's going on. But first, we were tagged. Somebody tagged us in a post. It was on Twitter, correct?
Yes, so it's either, I've heard both pronunciations of the last name Alex, so I apologize. Okay. One of them is going to be wrong. It's either Alex Abernathy or Alex Abernathy. And he is a Tennessee radio host. He wanted to know, he's creating a list of the worst U.S. presidents. And he says, widely open to change based on different opinions. Here's where I'm currently at. Number 1, Buchanan. Number 2, Wilson. Enemy of the people, Woodrow Wilson. Number 3, FDR. Number 4 or 5, he's not sure, Biden, Carter, Obama. And he wanted to get our thoughts. And of course, I knew who your number 1 was going to be. But I'd like to hear, who comes, who's the number 1, and then how do we go forward?
Awesome. Okay, so contrary to popular belief, aka people who know me, Abraham Lincoln is not number 1 on my list.
Oh, he's not. Okay,
he is not. Unfortunately, okay. This man is not. I feel like I talk about him the most is because people love him so much and don't understand like all the horrible things that he has done. But he's not number 1. And he's not number 2. He is number 3. He's number 3 on my list of worst presidents in U.S. history. I will say Joe Biden is quickly climbing that ladder, moving up. But for me, I will say number 1 has got to be Woodrow Wilson. Like there is no ifs, ands, buts about it. Woodrow Wilson, number 1. Number 2, of course, is FDR because of everything and his whole New Deal that everybody loves and that I cannot stand. I actually got into an argument because I was like, man, FDR is a horrible president. And they're like, oh my gosh, but the New Deal, he's so great. And I was just like, you and I have very different views on the New Deal and how great it was. So, and then 3 for me is Abraham Lincoln. Buchanan, he's in my top 5. I think Joe Biden is definitely in my top 10. Obama's in my top 10 as far as things go or whatnot. So, I mean, but those are my 3, and it's going to take a lot. But I think the way Joe Biden is currently handling this current conflict is quickly moving him up the ranks as far as one of the worst presidents. But I will say that it is going to take a lot to overcome 1, 2, and 3. but it is definitely possible. What about you?
Yeah, so I told him, I said, I have a recency bias, obviously, because I'm more familiar with the good and the bad of later presidents, and obviously their policies were down to me more closely. And I said, I also evaluate based on not only policy, but the sentiments cultivated. So I had said, I didn't really contest his first ranking. Maybe I didn't read the instructions clearly, because he did say, it's open to changing. I said that Biden feels worse than Carter, but is only a year in. So in theory, I would disqualify for fairness sake, but in practice, I really can't. I really can't. So Biden right now is worse than Carter. And Carter and LBJ, for me, both top Obama. It would be a toss-up between him and George W. Bush. Wilson is truly awful. And might be FDR, Wilson, and then we might do Biden. Buchanan comes in there too. But and then I actually suggested, I would love to see this, because it's so hard to rank them all as one group. So I suggested a March Madness style bracket where you do this. He's into it. We might. So I suggested a March Madness style bracket where you do every 20 years. You do 20-year brackets, and then you're like, okay. And so is Joe Biden worse than Jimmy Carter? And then you have them square off, and then you get the truly worst of the worst presidents that way.
Oh man, that would be great. I would love to pick the seeding for that. Because you would think about it, you would have George Washington would be a 16 seed, not even a question. George Washington, who is the other one? Is it Grover Cleveland?
Silent Calvin Coolidge. It's pretty great.
Yeah, yes.
I like the silent part.
Who was he was the one who died an hour into office, or something like that, or he died.
No, Jim Henry Harrison died.
Yes, he was a month into office, because he did his inauguration speech in the rain and then caught pneumonia and died.
Your favorite president is the one who dies quickly. That was great policy, dying.
Yeah, he's great policy. He died a month into his presidency. No, but there was one who ran for president and did say this office in a sense should not exist. I should not have this much power and so forth. And I want to say, I think it was it wasn't Cleveland.
That wasn't Ike, was it?
But it was those are definitely some 16 seeds. If you're only a month in the office, you're a 16 seed. But I would imagine Andrew Jackson has got to be a top seed in there. I would say that Abraham Lincoln is probably not going to be a top seed in most people think, in most people. But if I am on the selection committee and I'm determining where they go, Abraham Lincoln has a huge chance of making my Final Four as far as worst presidents in U.S. history. But I would love it. I mean, and March Madness is right around the corner.
That's what I said.
Most of the what are they called? Postseason tournaments, conference tournaments are actually going up in the next week or so. But I mean, I'm excited. I'm so excited. But yes, if he is in it, please, if he does that, please, I'm all in for that. I'm all in for it.
We can help, and that is the Alex Abernathy show, and that is it's a syndicated radio show. So I will, if you give me a list too, if you can try to seed these guys or just write down some general thoughts, I can relay them to him. So thank you, Alex, for providing us with that little lighthearted. Who are our worst presidents?
Yes,
start to our podcast.
I'll at least go top 10, but starting to show off on a light note, which is great. I always enjoy talking about history and presidents and dead presidents, because that's what our lovely fiat money is printed on, and outside of Benjamin Franklin and so forth. But I loved all that. But getting down into the seriousness of what has transpired over the past week, it is not anything that is lighthearted at all. It is very heavy. And even in our pre-show, we had kind of discussed As far as just a little bit of thoughts, Amanda has very little as far as knowledge as to my stance on a lot of these things, which is a good thing, because we come into this knowing what we're going to talk about, but not knowing where each other stands on these things. So if there's a disagreement, we talk out the disagreement, we kind of move on, and then you guys may think like, oh, they agree on everything, so they discuss things before the show. No, it's like 2 or 3 minutes. Hey, this is what we're going to talk about. Hey, we're good here. We're good here. We're good here. Hey, I'm interested to hear your thoughts or whatnot, and so forth. But again, if you were living under a rock and you do not know and you don't watch any sort of news and you're not on any sort of social media, Russia has started a war with Ukraine, invaded Ukraine, taken a couple of cities. Ukraine has fought hard and whatnot on a lot of things, but it's very. I am not the most knowledgeable person on Russian history and Ukrainian history. Seeing how Ukraine has only been a country for 30 years, I want to say, right around 30 years,
close to that.
So I mean, I've been alive longer than the Ukraine has been a country, but I don't. I don't live in Eastern Europe. I don't really know about all their history. I know about USSR. And their conflicts with the U.S., but I don't know about the depths as far as what they go. So this is my caveat to everything I'm going to say. I am not a subject matter expert on this. I typically, and I still don't, I'm not saying that I will here, but I typically do not speak on things that I do not know. So even in this conversation that we're having today, I will speak on things that I know, based off of what we are currently seeing, based off of what I've heard, and based off of the history between these two countries and what Putin has done and what Zelensky has done and all of that. So, but Amanda is definitely in the trenches with us. We were talking about some stuff pre-show, and I was like, oh man, like these would be some good ideas to discuss. But Amanda, what are your thoughts? And if you want to start us off, just what's happening over in the Ukraine. I typically know about Ukraine because I do watch 90 Day Fiance, and a lot of people who are on 90 Day Fiance are women from the Ukraine. So there's Natalie, there's Yara from Ukraine, Julia. Yeah, there's a lot of people over there from the Ukraine. That is like the host of 90 Day Fiance. All of them coming over to America, but that is to my extent. I have more depth on 90 Day Fiance than I do on the country of Ukraine and so forth. That says a lot. I'm sorry, guys. I know you've lost a whole lot of faith in me because I watched 90
That's fantastic.
But don't knock it until you watch it because there are some good seasons. Sorry.
I feel like maybe we'll have some more people auditioning for that. That's horrible and terrible. I'm never gonna. No. Okay. Anyhow, so well again, and as I go through all of this, interrupt me because it was basically a brain dump. I have been, and on at Civil Discord Pod on Twitter, we are trying to bring you top lines that are verifiable or at the very least not completely debunkable. There hasn't been a whole lot of I have provided a little bit of commentary on Civil Discord Pod on our Twitter of late, but I try to preface that with this is Amanda talking,
right?
And a lot of it's just retweets, not necessarily endorsements, just showing you what we found and what seems credible as of now. Right. First thing I want to do is, this is really interesting. So I call this my Cold War globe. This is, I collect globes and maps, and this is, I don't know when this was made, but it was definitely made before I was born. Now you can't see it very close. It's amazing because I was looking at this the other night. For those of you who aren't able to see our lovely visual aids on the YouTube, you cannot get a single screen that has the entire USSR in it. It's this big brown area. It's massive.
Yeah.
So this is Cold War USSR, and you see here that indeed part of the USSR we've got Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldavia. I think now that's Moldova. Again, Ukraine, part of the USSR, Belarus, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. All of this. Okay. Now Russia has been obviously cut back quite a bit since this globe was made. And it really is just something to look at. So in the first place, that kind of helps us consider a little bit of what Putin's thinking is. And nobody knows. There are rumors, unsubstantiated rumors, uncorroborated rumors that Putin has Parkinson's or cancer. I will say, if you look at him, he's aging, but his face is quite puffy, so that, it looks almost like a steroidal type of reaction, but that's pure speculation.
Right.
I say that in order to suggest that he's aware of his lifeline, is aware of what he's witnessed over his life. And I don't think it's speculation to say that he is quite tired of feeling as though Russia has been this cuckold of the West. Putin has never wanted to be part of NATO. I'll get into this a little bit more later. Putin does not want to be part of the West. He doesn't want that. He doesn't want to have to play by the West's international rules.
Right.
Those to him are bad and dumb, and he shouldn't have to play by them because those rules were made in order to weaken him. Why would he want to play by those rules?
Exactly.
So he, I think, is aware of his limitations. He's aware of the ways that his country has been limited. There might be some residual. I think there is residual anger related to the color wars. And I think he saw an opening in, first of all, yes, some weakness that he estimated from Biden in the withdrawal from Afghanistan. That to him seemed to signal to a lot of people a policy of retrenchment on which he could capitalize. Sure. But it's not just America. There's a lot of European indebtedness to Russia right now, primarily from Germany. Germany's fantastic. So they decide, we're going to be green, guys. We're going to help the environment by outsourcing our pollution to Russia. So we're not actually going to invest in nuclear or clean energy. We're just going to have Russia ship in oil and natural gas, and that's going to help the environment. It's not helping the environment if you're just having someone else make the environment dirty for you.
Exactly.
And paying them. So there's indebtedness between Germany and Russia on that front. So I think he saw an opening. Anyway, he goes and he chooses to, first of all, and declare the sovereignty of these separatist regions. That's the first act. Very shortly afterward, there's this invasion of Ukraine. One thing that is clear is that the U.S. has great intel on this. The U.S. for a long time had been signaling Putin's every move, and that seems to have thrown him. And I wonder, first of all, who do we have? How close are they to Putin? And what are the implications of that going forward if there is any escalation, or if there?
And I'm trying to say this without sounding like a Trumper or things of that nature, but it shows like you would understand why Donald Trump wanted to be good with Putin, because maybe there was some knowledge of, hey, this guy is really trying to move in on other countries. So how about we try to keep him close, and wherever he's, and again, like you said, don't know where he's getting his intel from, don't know the crux of all that. But I think it, for people to say, that was one of the knocks from the left as far as Trump was concerned, was how close he was to Putin and Russia this and Russia that. And you see Donald Trump, again, I'm not a Trumper, trying to make nice, because maybe there is a level of understanding of, hey, this guy is off his, I won't say off his rocker, but this guy wants to see, everything what was the USR. He wants to see that come back. He wants to see all these countries be back part of what we call Mother Russia. Like, there's a reason why it's called Mother Russia, because it is, my wife, she goes, oh, the motherland. Like, like its mother Russia, like, yes, because that is where all these countries have stemmed off from, because it's a USSR kind of thing. And so I just find that very ironic of the intel that we as a country have had, and it just shows the why Trump was acting a certain way and why people have, and then it causes me to question why Biden was so, why his verbiage as far as his speak about Russia was so, I don't want to say harsh, because I can't imagine it being harsh, but why it was so brass and as far as, hey, we're going to deal with Russia because of this, and showing that was more from a campaign perspective and not from a true intel of understanding what Russia is currently about.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think a lot of that during the campaign seemed to be to provide a contrast, right? Like Trump is so soft on Russia, and I'm going to be really hard on him because Trump's a Russian asset.
Right.
I don't know the extent to which we were sharing this intel with Ukraine. That's another question that I have, because Zelensky seems to have been more blindsided than we were by this. There are reports that toward the end of 2021, he was very skeptical about this taking place, and of course that's shifted a lot. But he seems to have been late to that party, and again, I wonder if that wasn't just his own skepticism and we were relaying this to him, or if we were withholding this information. If so, why? It seems like it would have been prudent in this case to have very open channels, of course open channels with the right people, but open channels of information on this. One thing I don't want to overlook is that Russia has taken and continues, I believe at this hour, to hold Chernobyl. That's a big deal. That gives Russia a lot of leverage, because Chernobyl's contained, but it can be uncontained, and that can be devastating.
Right.
So Russia continues to hold Chernobyl, has tried to make it into and take Kyiv, has not been able to do that. That's another thing that seems to have blindsided Putin. I think he wanted a Schleifen plan. He really did. I think he was honest when he said we don't intend to occupy Ukraine. He wanted to go in and have this done. It's clear the ground troops were not prepared for an invasion, even of this length. There are reports, unconfirmed, of them stealing food, not having enough resources. We do know they're quite young. They're between 18 and 22 years old. So unlike maybe 40-year-old Russians and older, they don't have a memory of Ukraine even being part of Russia. So they don't have this sense of loyalty, like, oh, we're taking this back for the motherland.
I'm sorry.
No, go on.
Just interject there. As far as the troops, I was listening to something. It was like, don't be mad at me, but Sirius XM on the way home. We were on the way home from our lunch date with my wife. She was like, hey, let's turn on something. So I was flipping through our Sirius XM, and CNN International came on. And of course, they were discussing Russia and so forth. And they were talking about how, I want to say it's a town that's got like right over 100,000 people in it, a town. It's more like a city. That's got 100,000 people in it, and how the Ukrainians were holding their ground on that, and they had captured some like 350 or so Russian soldiers. And in talking with the soldiers were saying, we were lied to about this. Like, we weren't expecting all this to take place. Our agenda was supposed to be this, and you guys are telling us that this has happened. So there is a lot of young soldiers who again, I mean, like you said, have no concept of Ukraine being part of Russia or the USSR, and are honestly feel like they're being lied to into a war, into a conflict, to invade another country.
And that's tragic.
Yes.
So there was a strategy that Putin had, which was essentially to establish aerial dominance, which has been tougher than expected, although right now Russia is strong aerially. That might not hold for a while, as we'll see, and then send in ground troops. As of now, there's still a lot of ground troops that are waiting to go in. So we don't know what else Putin has in store. Maybe there are more sophisticated troops that are waiting on the border. and in particular Belarus. I always say Belarus, and then evidently it's Belarus. But they have just approved a referendum that would revoke their non-nuclear capacity, so that gives Russia an end to fire nuclear weapons from that closer range in Belarus. Of course, that area is held by one of Putin's cronies. So that will be interesting. Another thing, final thing that seems to have surprised Putin, and it surprised me, is NATO and UN's coming together for once to do things. And it took them a long time, but finally there have been some impactful developments here. So NATO has reacted. They're being surprisingly cooperative. Russia is out of the SWIFT banking system, which is kind of like, it's kind of like the central heating, the thermostat of the banking system. So it's what allows various banks to talk to each other. Putin seems to have been prepared for a development like this over the past several years. Reserves have been shifting. The Russian government has been putting more and more of their reserves into Chinese yuan and other currencies. But even so, the SWIFT cutoff is expected to choke about 50% of Russian reserves, which is not insubstantial. If 50% of your bank account, you didn't have access to it anymore all of a sudden, and you were in the middle of a big project, that would hurt. That would hurt you. So that I think is actually a step. It's a step that has an effect. They have also established, or NATO has established, no-fly zones in NATO countries as well as over Canada for Russia. Now, President Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials are pleading with NATO to create a no-fly zone over Ukraine. The reason that is currently a no-go as far as NATO is concerned is that would give NATO authority to shoot down Russian planes in non-NATO airspace, which would be considered an act of aggression. And they don't want that. However, even Switzerland has reset the bar on neutrality, and they are now cutting off Russia from their resources as well. So that's a big deal.
That is.
Yes. Putin is already threatening nuclear action. He's put his arms on higher alert. But again, we have all of these alert levels in the US, and Russia's no exception. So they've moved up a stage in terms of nuclear readiness. It's still not DEFCON 5. Like it's still not the main event. It's at this point nothing to be panicked about.
I think that they use the term it's deterrent arms. As far as like it's like a hey, just warning you, we are setting things up for defense deterrent as far as our nuclear things are concerned. And when they were talking about this, it was more of like a this. Oh, and by the way, the nuclear arms as well too. It wasn't like a hey, yes, we're showing up we're showing up our nuclear force. It was more of a hey, that's one of the many things that we are referring to as far as a deterrent for you guys so nobody comes out and does something crazy that would push Russia off the edge or so.
Right. And it's quite likely, I'll point out, the US is much more clandestine about these sorts of things. It's quite likely, I would imagine that we are also preparing here for events. And we have intercepting technology that's not foolproof, but it is something for ICBMs. So that's a known factor. In an unprecedented move, the EU has just today sent lethal weapons to Ukraine, including, and this was just, in fact, a couple hours before we started recording, including new fighter jets. And that could really change the game in terms of aerial dominance. These jets are Russian manufactured. So that's how that's necessary for Ukrainians to be able to fly them. obviously, because they're not going to be able to fly just any fighter jets. This allows them to, looking at my information here, this allows them to be able to hop into these jets and fight Russians really on maybe from a stronger position than the Russians are, since again this is Ukrainian airspace, and those jets should be operational now. They were scheduled to be operational within an hour, and that was a couple hours ago. So they should be operational. We should have pilots that are able to be in those. The U.S. has also sent surface-to-air missiles, which is the first time that they've openly sent surface-to-air missiles to another country since the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan.
Wow.
Yeah. I have thought, and I have said this, if I were in the State Department, if I were the Libertarian Secretary of State, I would be angling for, I would have wanted to do this before, but angling for sending clandestine special ops into Ukraine to fight in Ukrainian uniform. If we were gonna, if it had escalated to this point, if we believed it to be a threat to NATO, if we believed it to be a threat to our country, if we believed that taking Ukraine was going to impinge on our sovereignty and on NATO countries' sovereignty, I would be doing that, because obviously there's not much of a way to tell who belongs to what country if you're fighting in a Ukrainian uniform.
Definitely.
So, and then finally, more new developments is that today, Sunday, Ukraine has agreed to hold talks with Russia with no preconditions, meaning there will not be a ceasefire, no preconditions on the Belarusian border. And again, as I said, Belarus just approved constitutional referenda renouncing their non-nuclear status. So at the same time, Russia is increasing its police presence in its capital due to protests there. And there seems to be, we've heard reports that Kyiv is strangely quiet at this hour. I, for my own part, am a little bit wary about what's going to happen during these peace talks. It could, or negotiations rather. It could be a gesture to buy time. We don't know what people have planned for this, so it'll be interesting to see. That's where we are up to now, and by the time people are listening to this podcast, things could have completely changed, and we could all be firing nukes at each other or planting flowers. I don't know.
Right. Exactly. It's so interesting to see how things have played out over the past week, and so I know I say I'm out of the politics realm and so forth, but there is a specific realm that I never get out of, and it's firearms. And it's interesting to see that Ukraine is literally passing out, firearms to its citizens to say, hey, like, here we are. We are calling upon our citizens to help defend our borders. Go, go to work. And it's, even to the point to where I think the U.S. had offered safe extraction for President Zelensky.
Oh yeah.
And he said, no. He was like, no, I just need ammo.
I need ammunition, not a ride. This is a really bad time for me to have a crush on a national leader, but I absolutely have the hugest crush on Volodymyr Zelensky.
Yes.
And call me. I love, he's a badass.
He really is. Because you see pictures of him suited up, like ready to go, and it's amazing to see. As much as I don't like governments and people of their states, like, you see somebody who is truly a firm believer, and he's like, hey, like, these are my people. I'm of the people. I'm going to stay here and do all this stuff. And, excuse me. And we see the opposite with our neighbors up north with honking horns and so forth. And I find it fascinating, but it's for a, for a lot of times, we see the attack on the firearms industry and this, that, or the other. And it's just so ironic that you have people who they will go out and say, oh, nobody needs this style of firearm because you're never going to need it. And if it worked, you're taking on the U.S. government. You're going to need fighter jets, and you're going to need F-15s and all those things. But yet we have a prime example of a country preparing its citizens to go to war, to fight for their country. Like, and again, I'm not the biggest of fan of all the founding fathers, but when they say a well-regulated militia, this is what it looks like to me. Citizens literally getting firearms and going to war. I mean, so there's a great silver lining in all this that I see is like people are standing up to these to Russian soldiers. I think there was some old grandma lady who told a soldier to pretty much like, hey, the soldier said, "You have a nice day," and she said, "I'll see you in hell," kind of stuff. Like just all kinds of different things of the Ukrainian citizen saying like, "You will not like come in here and occupy these areas as well as you think you are." And I mean, and as you pointed out earlier, I think that has really thrown a wrench into everybody's plans because Putin's talking about, oh, you know what? Let's go. Let's go in. Let's go out. Do what we have to do. And the Ukrainians are like, I don't know who you thought you were dealing with, but we're here, and you were not going to have a you're if we go down, we will go down swinging. Like we are not afraid to go down swinging because you guys are not fighting fair and so forth. I mean, attacking schools and things of that nature, which I think for me, it just shows how back in the very beginning, as far as what you're talking about, not everybody believes in this Western view of society.
Yeah.
Not everybody wants to be a part of that. For some reason, we here in the West, and the West, I mean, even Western Europe. So we here in the West believe in this idea of, oh, everybody's going to peacefully cohabitate and no aggression upon your neighbor. I mean, at least for me, it's this peaceful like utopia of everybody's going to agree with everybody and everybody wants to be like the United States. Everybody wants to be like these other countries because we are great. And when you actually get out there and realize half of the world doesn't, literally Eastern Europe, and by Eastern Europe, I really mean Russia. When you talk about like most of the Middle East, Asian countries, they view the idea of growth like that, but they don't adhere to the same values and to the same mindset of what the West does. And it just shows like you can't just force your ideology on everybody and just assume that just because you were deemed a world superpower that you're going world superpowers. We think of world superpowers. We think of Western countries. And sorry, like Russia is not all. They're not about falling in line with the terms that we have put on them. And when you're poking bears and they see weakness, like they'll strike. It is what it is, and that's exactly what we're seeing here in this conflict, in this war that has broken out.
Yeah, and you're beautifully, going into another point that I had about sanctions. So sanctions, first of all, sanctions almost never work as they're applied. So that's going to be my disclaimer for the sake of argument.
Yes.
If we were going to impose sanctions, we would have imposed them much earlier.
Yes.
Because if sanctions do work, they do work as a deterrent. They don't work to get someone to stop waging an active assault on another country. Yeah. It's not like, you're waging this assault and maybe in 6 months, I'm not going to have a lot of money, so I should stop now. That's not how it works. So no. Sanctions, first of all, if they're ever going to be imposed, they're imposed early, before there's an invasion. Right. They're imposed on the autocratic, kleptocratic class, right. Not on the people. There was something absolutely absurd that Jen Psaki said this week, which is, or no, in fact, well, it was both Jen Psaki and Joe Biden. something was heard that Joe Biden said this past week, where he said, well, yes, these sanctions are going to hit the people of Russia, but then the people of Russia will understand that this pain is coming from Putin. I'm thinking, so they can vote him out? I mean,
like,
so in the next election, they'll know, don't vote for Putin and it'll all be okay. So sanctions they're not going to work against the Russian people, because it's not the Russian people that did this, sir.
Right.
And it's not the Russian people that can get out of this without a huge coup, a huge, deadly, bloody coup.
Right. And that in turn is going to make the Russian people hate everybody else, because they're like, hold up, in our time of need, you guys are literally going to make things worse for us. Like, that logic is almost as bad as Nancy Pelosi saying that more jobs are creating inflation. Like, I mean, that's just moronic.
Right. And then Jen Psaki comes out and she says that these sanctions are going to be effective because Putin wants Russia to have a strong national economy. Oh, and that was nails on a chalkboard. That was the moment. Because Vladimir Putin does not want Russia to have a strong national economy. He does not care about that. He wants to have a strong international presence. Yes. And in openly trading democracies and openly trading capitalistic democracies, you have a strong international presence by having a strong national economy where economic prosperity is generally diffused, because only then are you able to have multiple individuals producing various goods that are able to be exchanged on the open international market. But Russia doesn't do that. Places like Russia and China do not do that. So in open trading democracies, strong international presence requires general economic prosperity. And autocracies, oligarchies, kleptocracies, it doesn't. And this is just one more example of what you pinpointed as the US's greatest strategic blunder, which is assuming that every nation in the world operates or wants to be like the West and will play by the West's rules to get the West's recognition.
Right.
In general, our most grievous foreign policy miscalculations are born of the belief that everyone shares our motives. They don't. They don't. And we have to accept that.
I know some of you guys saw me looking down. I'm looking up because people fail to realize that Russia, when you impose like economic things, Russia's GDP from an economic standpoint is not very high.
No,
like it's not like they're these great producers of anything. You know, I was listening and they said it's very similar to, like, it's close to Spain. Like when you think of Russia's GDP, it's close to Spain. I just looked it up and I think it's like 1.4, like per capita. I mean, of course, so per capita, I want to say they're right around like $11,000, $12,000 per capita. And it was, hang on, let me pull it up. I think they are currently 1.4. So it's like 1.4 trillion or whatnot. And to put that in perspective, China is 14.7 trillion. So let me make sure that I got that right. Yes, because it's got it 14 trillion 722.73 billion. Yeah. So like China's economy and GDP is nearly 10 times that size or whatnot. So it's not like we're talking about Russia is this great economic powerhouse that is really concerned about their economy when we're imposing these sanctions on them. Oh, look at you. Oh, you can't do this. You can't do that. They're like, we're already doing what we want to do and you're not stopping us. So, like you said, sanctions should have happened a year ago. Like if at least a year ago, because you have the intel, like, hey, this is what they're getting ready to do. These are all the things that they're getting ready to go about. Then, hey, you know what? In order to deter them from doing that, let's say, hey, we're going to do this, and albeit probably wouldn't make a difference because Putin's going to be like, oh, you are just expediting the process as far as what I'm going to do. So I was going to wait until I saw a real opening from your president, but now that I have the leader of NATO and everybody just like talking about these sanctions and stuff, hey, you know what? Let me just up my timeline from a year from now to 6 months from now or whatnot, because I know that I'm not chasing economic power. I'm not chasing economic status. I want everybody to know that I have a strong military base and not to mess with me. Like, that's what he wants everybody to know.
And you mentioned China too, and I mean, again, and this for these countries, and I think in general, because of all these considerations, sanctions were not going to work. If you want to impose economic consequences, you make them targeted to the tyrants that are terrorizing others. But yeah, even China, right? They've got a lot of debt. Places like China and Russia are trying to establish international dominance, not by opening themselves, not by opening their markets, but by squeezing other sectors of the global economy, right? If you think about debt with China, if you think about oil and natural gas with Russia, it's been very effective at making sure that it has that market cornered in Europe. So these countries do not establish international dominance by having a thriving economy like a democracy, like a capitalistic liberal democracy would try to do. These countries are able to establish international dominance by closing off areas of their peoples and their trading partners, in scare quotes, economies. I want to touch, by the way, on, there is misinformation on both sides. We can't be sure what exactly is true, especially in terms of death counts and in terms of various stories that are being told. But one story that was told very early on was that this is all NATO's fault anyway. This is all the US's fault anyway, because we promised Russia that Ukraine would never be a part of NATO and that we would not expand NATO. Ladies and gentlemen, this never happened. This is kind of like when you're in a relationship and you have a discussion with someone and you ask them for something and they're like, and then you come back to them later and you say, hey, remember you promised me this? There was never a formal, we've all been on both sides of that discussion, both sides of that. So there was never a formal agreement that we would not expand NATO. There was a formal agreement called the Budapest Memorandum when we relocated nuclear weapons from Ukraine back to Russia at the end of the Cold War. And so that's, again, these weapons, Ukraine wouldn't have been able to operationalize them, but we relocated these weapons, NATO did, NATO. We did so with the agreement that in exchange, NATO would defend Ukraine if they were ever invaded. We would protect Ukraine's borders. And that's the Budapest Memorandum. And these sorts of agreements are not uncommon for us to make with non-nuclear countries. So the fallout of this, no pun intended, might also involve a revived arms race, because you have other countries saying, okay, well, we are not armed and in terms of nuclear weapons. And we won't be protected either, because NATO said they'd protect Ukraine. They're not. And again, I'm going to go back to China, because China in particular is very good at developing relationships with weaker countries than they, posturing themselves as a friend of developing countries in a way that kind of really hurts the people of the developing countries, but helps aggrandize the government. China could get a lot more allies out of this by offering nuclear assistance to them, offering them help in developing and operationalizing nuclear weapons. They get a lot more allies. They could be nuclear allies. So this is where, if you're going to make an agreement, you hold to it.
Yes.
So that was one more thing.
No, you're good. Because I've had people asking my views on this, and Maurice, you're an ANCAP. Like, I'm pretty sure you're the person who thinks that the U.S. just needs to sit out and not do anything about currently what's going on. And I say, I've thought about this because I've been like, okay, so like, Maurice, what are your principles? Like what? Where do you hold true? And for me, it's a don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, then this is a sign of aggression. And so if I see somebody naturally aggressing on somebody else, then I'm going to do something about it. And so, which is why I'm a firm believer. I am not saying that the United States needs to be the police of the world. We need to be the protectors and so forth. But if we have already entered into some sort of agreement of, hey, Ukraine, we will defend your borders. If you guys do this for us, then that, my people, is a contract. And I'm a firm believer of not breaching contracts. You should do it. If you should not be the first person to breach the contract. Now, if Ukraine would have breached the contract, then okay, kudos. Hey, you're on your own. You breached the contract. It's on you. But that's not what happened, And so it's if this is what we're saying, like, hey, we need to go. We as and I can't believe that you're going to hear these words from an ANCAP's mouth, but if this is the agreed upon terms of the contract, then you need to uphold the agreed upon terms of the contract. So if regardless of whether it was, Bush 41, Clinton, Bush 43, like whoever it was, like it's been something that nobody has said, hey, we need to renegotiate these terms of this contract. Nobody has once said that. And so we need to uphold the terms of that. And in some way, shape, or form, we've got to say, hey, this is not okay. And China has come out and said, hey, US, we will side with you in this conflict or whatnot. Of course, they make stipulations on it.
They say they do that with both of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but if you guys do this, then you guys can't, then you got to make sure that Taiwan is, and we got to recognize that as part of as part of China. And then if you do that, then if you don't do that, then it's this whole circular thing or whatnot. So that being said, it's the U.S. has to do something as opposed to just sanctions. You can't just say, oh, well, we're going to stifle your economy, give you a slap on the wrist, even though you've been preparing for it over the past, we don't know how many years. Do not think that Maurice is saying that, hey, we need to put troops on the ground. That is not at all what I'm saying. Okay. Unless that was in the contract. But we provide all kinds of other countries with military aid and providing them with all kinds of defense mechanisms, whether it be actual tanks or weapons of some sort or whatever the case may be. Just ask Yemen and Saudi Arabia how that's working out for Yemen. So we do. That's not a good thing. You guys can look it up.
I'm sure a lot of libertarians know about Yemen. Yeah,
exactly. So it's one of those things of like we've got to do something. If this is what the contract states, and these are the rules that I'm applying myself to. It's almost a way of like this. If I'm walking down the street and I see a man and he's getting ready to fight somebody else, and the guy is trying to run away and saying, hey, I don't want to be any part of this and so forth. And I see it, and I see everything from start to finish, how it goes down and what's going on. And I'm like, man, this guy has no right to beat this other guy up. I, as a person who's a firm believer in don't hurt people, don't take their stuff, will take it upon me to defend the guy who's being aggressed upon. And so if I view it at that individual level and I scale it up, hey, this is what's happening here. And at least from my knowledge, again, something could come out tomorrow and I could be completely 100% wrong. And I will acknowledge that. I will. I have no issue doing that at all. But from what I'm seeing, if somebody is crossing borders of somebody else, then that is an act of aggression. And I cannot just let people say, oh, yeah, hey, here you go. Because I see this happening a lot with libertarians. And this is what I think is a horrible take. They say, oh, the U.S. does it to other countries. We over here, we start. and it's not the same. Let's be real, it's not the same because we are not officially crossing borders into all these countries that we bomb. I mean, we did as far as Afghanistan and Iraq and so forth, but it's in the at least in those instances, you can say something like, well, the U.S. was responding to something that somebody else did it in that country and so forth, and there were some terrorist attacks here or there. You can lie your way into that, which is what has happened. But I see a lot of libertarians doing this number of, hey, the U.S. has done this to other countries. They're bombing the mess out of them. They're out here, they got troops on the ground. They're invading and so forth. But now the U.S. is coming out and condemning them and condemning Russia for doing this. It's just like, well, the U.S. is a bunch of hypocrites. You're right. They are. That doesn't mean that what Russia is doing is right, at all. So instead of having a poor take of saying, hey, the U.S. is hypocrites and I can't believe that they're coming out and speaking against Russia and this, that, the other when we're doing the same thing, say, hey, you know what? For the first time, the U.S. is doing something that is actually that is correct. In a long time, they're doing something that is correct. So let's address that while addressing and then while we address this issue, we can say, hey, U.S., let's practice what you preach because you're doing the right thing and coming to the aid of Ukraine and what you should, but you need to make sure that you're doing the same thing with these other countries that are out there.
Yeah. And I think you're being perfectly consistent. I honestly think that, you've got a contract and that's a voluntary agreement between parties. Yes. You honor that contract. That is perfectly in accord with free market capitalism, including anarcho-capitalism. So yeah, no, that's entirely consistent. I'm working on an article. Who knows if I will publish it, but I'm working on an article called, working title is How Not to Argue About Foreign Policy as a Libertarian. And one of the things you should not do as a libertarian arguing foreign policy is just start yelling about times that the U.S. military screwed up in the past.
Yes.
If we're talking about, the question is, should the U.S. do X? Your response is not, did you hear about why the U.S. sucked at it?
Exactly.
I mean, again, that's a strategy argument. That's not an argument for whether or not something is a proper action to take.
Right.
And I agree with what I think you're saying. The thrust of it is that our mission should not be to spread democracy, but it should be, given our position, given our power, given our values, it should be to protect sovereignty.
Yes.
And we see that because if we allow sovereignty to be infringed upon somewhere, this is not just a McCarthyist Cold War dead talking point. We see sovereignty being infringed upon somewhere, especially because we do have all of these trade relations with other countries. You don't have a trade relationship without having some kind of military expectation. I'm sorry, you don't. Because if a country gets blown up, then that affects you. If your trade partner gets blown up, that affects you. So if we turn a blind eye to defending others' sovereignty when it is infringed upon, and when there is a request for sovereignty to be defended, then that is a blot on our own merit, and it weakens us, and it weakens and puts our sovereignty at risk in the long or not even particularly long run.
Right.
There's so much more to say. I could go on for a while, but I'm thinking in terms of, and we touched on this a little bit already, things to do now and things to do in the future. Mm-hmm. I think the first thing to note is that being wholly reactive on foreign policy puts us at risk.
Yes.
That we need a strong dose of strategic humility in terms of not expecting that other countries are going to think like us. Right. And countries are not going to react solely to us. Countries are independent agents. Sometimes they make decisions about what to do, regardless of what the U.S. has or has not done in the past. Right. Energy independence. And there's another nuclear option, and it's called going nuclear in terms of clean energy.
Yes.
This, U.S. needs to be energy independent. In that sense, if we'd done that, these fake sanctions wouldn't be harming our economy in the way that they might be getting ready to do. If Europe had 1,000 clean nuclear plants, we wouldn't have this dependence, or they wouldn't have this dependence on Russian gas and fossil fuels.
Very much so.
Changing the way we think about military spending. So,
sorry, we were literally going over taxes in my class, and we're going over how taxes are broken down as far as your mandatory spending, your discretionary spending, how much of the discretionary spending gets spent on the military. Like, so I'm literally teaching my class all these things. And okay, people, I am doing my best not to be biased when I'm having these conversations about taxes, but I'm pretty sure my class knows how I feel about taxes. And yes, but when it comes to military spending and how we spend in the military, this is something that actually has come up in conversation within my classes.
I'm sure. Yeah. And if you look at all the things that we spend money on at the federal level that we have no business spending money on at the federal level, this wouldn't even require increasing the budget. This would just be spending smarter. And in particular, you get more resources. I think, if we're talking about 21st century foreign policy spending, you spend more resources on intelligence, you spend more resources on cyber and cyber deterrence, cyber defense, cyber offense on occasion, and on irregular operations. I don't foresee us fighting wars in the same way in the 21st century. I do see a lot of urban warfare, which is a completely different ballgame. I see a lot of quick operations, again, irregular covert operations, special missions. That's where, again, Libertarian Secretary of State Amanda, that's where I would be focusing the majority of resources and development. We cut out wasteful spending at the federal level and devote the resources that we already have to defensive innovation, developing the latest tech, developing cyber deterrence, surpassing Chinese nuclear and technological capacity. This is not about invading other countries. This is about protecting sovereignty and protecting our sovereignty. Because if we do not act, it can and will happen here. And again, that's not a McCarthyist talking point. That is simply true. And there are ways to avoid it without costing money and without costing lives, especially if we maximize intel and cyber deterrence.
Definitely. And I just, and talk about the energy independence, because I know this is going to hit a lot of people. Like, for the U.S., that needs to happen. Like, I mean, because the biggest thing, everybody's talking about your gas prices. Gas prices are going up. Gas prices are going up because oil prices are going up. And it would be if the U.S. was, and I'm not sounding like a Trumpist, but if we would have the oil reserves that we had under a specific president, instead of those being closed down, and instead of pipelines being shut down, and all this case, maybe, just maybe, the economic effect of Russia moving into Ukraine and all these sanctions and stuff would not be as severe in our pocketbooks as we are currently, as it currently is. Now, I'm not saying that there would be no effect. But what I am saying is it would not be as severe because, you know what? We're not as reliant on anybody else as we need to be. Why? Because we have things within our own borders, within our own system that we can use. And then my gas wouldn't go up 40 cents in the matter of 24 hours. Like, I mean, it's for some reason, I mean, some people will be like, oh, blah, 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 blah. It's like gas is going to be this price. And I can't say how expensive things are going to be. But what I can say is when I go to bed and gas is $2.80, and then I wake up and gas is $3.10, I'm like, I know gas over there in your area, you're like $2.80. Like, man, I'm over here paying $5 a gallon.
$280? Is that what you mean? It's $280?
Yes,
I wish it was $5 a gallon.
$2.80, and I saved 10 cents on a gallon by using my Buc-ee's credit card.
There you go.
So, but I mean, so when I go to sleep and it's 2:80 and I wake up and it's 3:10 and it's an increase of 30 cents, like I think, oh, what in the world would cause something like this to go up 30 cents? Could it possibly be some conflict that's over somewhere on the other side of the world, in which a country is a mass producer of oil? Like, I don't know, possibly that could be the case. I mean, I'm not the smartest man in the room, but I feel like I can pick up on clues and things of that nature, and so it just goes to show the importance of being independent on certain levels instead of being reliant on everybody. Because I feel like the only thing that the U.S. is independent on is their military. Everything else is pretty much like, we get this because we provide you defense. Yep. We get this from you because we provide you defense, and that is not always the best option to go, especially when you're in a country as big as the U.S. and as populated as the U.S. Maybe there are some smart people who can come up with some things. And I don't know. That's just me.
Again, being self-sustaining would help us be stronger economically as well. And it's fun. Jonah Goldberg says this frequently, where he'll say, we've got this huge, global warming crisis, right? This huge climate crisis, and we have to act right now, or else the entire planet will be destroyed in 12 years. We have to do everything possible except go nuclear. Except it's just too much of a risk. And now, again, we see that environmental innovation and environmental and energy independence can, in fact, help foreign policy and can be a huge asset in terms of military independence and, again, protecting sovereignty, which is what, again, our foreign policy should be all about. One last thing that perhaps we should not be doing is allowing Russia to broker the new Iran nuclear deal, which is still somehow on the table. I could scream, but that's going on. And again, as I said, a lot more material here, a lot of things that we didn't cover. There are tons of developments that are constantly happening. So
for sure. And it's always changing. It's always changing. For the hour that we've been talking, I'm pretty sure new developments have come through and things have changed. So like we are things are changing by the hour or whatnot. So I will say this: if you listen to this episode and things have changed, then that's how life is. Just make sure you listen to the whole episode, get our views, and then say, oh, but this has changed, and say, okay. And then best believe that if something's changed, something is majorly shifted, then our viewpoint or our strategy has probably shifted as well too. So, but again, guys, I know everybody knew exactly what this episode was going to be about, and it's the only thing that's in the news cycle as far as things are concerned. And I mean, it's interesting to talk about. It's pretty fun. Maybe this week I will spend time digging into the relations of Ukraine and Russia, and maybe depending on what happens over this upcoming week, we can go into that. We can discuss those things and figure out what all. I mean, outside of Vladimir Putin wanting to restore the USSR, outside of that, what all has led up to this and so forth. So I feel like that's always a fun, interesting dive. At least for me, it is, because I'm a nerd like that, and I love history. I love cause and effect events and so forth. But thank you guys for listening so much. Thank you guys if you're watching this on the YouTubes that's out there. Thank you so much for watching us on YouTube, because we are live on YouTube. We're not live on YouTube. Our video is posted on YouTube every single week. So we're thankful for that. Thanks for Justin for everything that he does.
Thank you, Justin.
Putting all this together. We are greatly appreciative of him. We will always give him a shout out because he is great like that, holding it down for us. Please be sure to subscribe to us on Apple iTunes. Please be sure to follow us on Spotify. Leave us a 5-star rating and review, because we know that we are worth it. Every bit of those stars, every single one of them. And you can give us some feedback as well too in that 5-star review. we would greatly appreciate that. Make sure you follow us on social media. Call me Maurice on my Instagram, Civil Discord Podcast on Instagram as well too. Follow us at Civil Discord Pod on Twitter, and then Ajax the Griff on Twitter as well too. Amanda is doing a great job holding it down on the Twitter. I go through and I see all the retweets and everything. I'm like, oh, okay, this is Russia. This is Russia. This is Russia. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, all right, Twitter is not a cesspool of idiocy all the time, just some of the time. So please be sure to do all of that. If you do all of that, share the show with a friend, a family member, somebody in Russia, somebody in Ukraine, somebody who watches 90 Day. I don't know. Share it with all three. Do all of that, and we will be back again with another episode of Civil Discord, your weekly dose of radical curiosity. Until then, y'all, be easy.
Slava Ukraine, stay fierce.